You wanted to say no, but you said yes. Not because you agreed, not because you wanted to, but because that familiar discomfort rose inside your chest. You didn't want to disappoint them. You didn't want to look selfish. You didn't want to be the difficult one. So you agreed and felt heavy right after. And here's the confusing part. Saying yes to others felt wrong, but saying no felt worse. If a simple boundary creates guilt inside you, this isn't weakness, it's a learned emotional pattern. And once you see it clearly, it starts to change. Maybe this happens more often than you admit. You rehearse a no in your head, but when the moment comes, your voice softens and turns into a yes. You say yes to the extra task. Yes to the invitation you don't want. Yes to the favor that drains you. And afterward, you don't feel kind, you feel resentful and tired. Part of you wonders, why is this so hard for me? Because for some people, saying no doesn't feel like a decision, it feels like a threat to connection. Not a social risk, an emotional one. There is a reason your system reacts this way. And once you understand it, boundaries stop feeling like betrayal. Let's stay close to real life for a moment. Not ideas, not psychology terms, just situations you've probably lived through. Someone asks you for something small, a favor, your time, your presence, your energy. You feel the answer immediately inside, no. Not aggressive, not dramatic, just clear, a quiet no. But before the word reaches your mouth, something else rises, tension, a tightening, a hesitation. You start editing your response in real time. You think, maybe I can manage. It's not that big. They'll be upset. It will look bad if I refuse. And within seconds, your clear internal no turns into a spoken yes. This happens in tiny moments. Staying longer on a call you're exhausted from. Accepting a plan you don't want. Agreeing to help when you're already overloaded. Answering messages when you need silence. Showing up emotionally when you're empty. From the outside, it looks like kindness, flexibility, generosity. From the inside, it feels like self-override. And the emotional cost appears later, not during. Later, you feel drained, irritated, quietly resentful, sometimes even ashamed, not of them, but of yourself. You think, why didn't I just say no? Let's look at another everyday version. Someone proposes something you're uncomfortable with, not terrible, not extreme, just not right for you. Maybe a topic, a joke, a request, a dynamic. Your body reacts first, discomfort registers fast. But instead of honoring that signal, you soften it, you minimize it, you translate it into politeness. You smile, you nod, you go along. Not because you agree, but because refusing feels heavier than tolerating. Many people who struggle to say no are not confused about what they want. They are conflicted about the emotional consequences of expressing it. The conflict is not informational, it's relational. Saying no feels emotionally expensive. Yes feels emotionally safer in the moment, but emotionally expensive later. Here's another familiar scene. You finally gather courage to say no, gently, respectfully, and the other person reacts with disappointment, not anger, just visible disappointment. Your chest drops. Even though you were reasonable, even though your boundary was fair, even though your tone was kind, their disappointment lands inside you like evidence of wrongdoing. You start negotiating backward. Maybe I can do part of it. Maybe later. Maybe something else. You begin repairing a rupture that wasn't actually a rupture, it was just a boundary. For people without this pattern, disappointment is tolerable. For people with this pattern, disappointment feels dangerous. Not logically dangerous, emotionally dangerous. Let's look at the invisible rule operating underneath. I can tolerate my discomfort, but not yours. So you absorb the discomfort into yourself to keep the relational surface smooth. This is not weakness, it is emotional adaptation. Many emotionally sensitive people learned early that harmony equals safety. Not loud harmony, emotional harmony. No tension, no displeasure, no relational friction. If friction appeared, something inside you moved quickly to reduce it. Appease, adjust, agree, soften. Over time, this becomes automatic. You don't think, I will abandon my boundary. You think, I will keep things okay. But keeping things okay often means making yourself smaller in the moment. Let's make this even more concrete. You're tired. Someone asks for emotional support. You don't have capacity, but you have empathy. Your empathy overrides your capacity. You show up, but internally you're fading. Afterward, you don't feel proud. You feel depleted. You gave from emptiness, not from generosity. Real generosity feels warm. Overridden generosity feels heavy. People who feel guilty saying no often confuse self-betrayal with kindness, because both look like giving from the outside. But the emotional signature is different. Kindness with consent feels open. Kindness with override feels tight. Your body knows the difference, even if your habits don't. Another variation of this pattern shows up with authority figures, bosses, parents, strong personalities, emotionally intense people. The stronger the other person's emotional presence, the harder it feels to say no. Not because you're incapable, but because your nervous system reads power, plus disappointment as relational threat. So your agreement becomes protective, not voluntary. You say yes to reduce emotional risk, not because you truly choose yes. Many people with this pattern describe something similar. I only realize what I actually wanted after I already agreed. That delay is important. It means your internal voice is present, but overridden by relational reflex. Reflex speaks faster than preference, until awareness grows. Let's normalize something important here. If you feel guilty saying no, it doesn't mean you don't value yourself. It usually means you value connection and learn to protect it by self-adjustment. Connection mattered enough that you learned to bend. That learning once helped you belong. But what helps you belong is not always what helps you stay whole. Right now, we're not trying to change your behavior yet, only to recognize the pattern with precision and compassion. Because the moment you clearly see, this is the guilt boundary pattern activating, you are already less trapped inside it. In the next part, we'll name the emotional mechanics underneath this guilt, and why saying no can feel like emotional wrongdoing even when it's relationally healthy. Let's begin to name what is happening underneath the guilt, not as a flaw, but as a structure. When you feel guilty for saying no, your emotional system is not reacting to the word no. It is reacting to what no represents inside your learned relationship map. For many people, no does not feel like refusal. It feels like risk. Not risk of punishment, risk of emotional disconnection. Your nervous system is wired for belonging. Human beings regulate emotionally through connection, so any action that appears to threaten connection can trigger internal alarm, even when the threat is small and temporary. Saying no is one of those actions. To someone without this pattern, saying no means, I can't do this. To someone with guilt boundary conditioning, saying no means, I might lose emotional safety. That difference changes everything. Let's break this into a simple internal equation many people carry without knowing. Agreement equals acceptance. Refusal equals rejection. Not logical rejection, emotional rejection. So when you say no, your system reacts as if you are damaging the relationship, even when you are simply expressing a limit. This is not cognitive confusion, it is emotional learning. Most of this learning happens early, long before adult reasoning develops. If, at important moments in your early relationships, emotional approval felt conditional, based on cooperation, compliance, or emotional ease, your system learned a powerful rule. Harmony preserves connection, and harmony becomes more important than authenticity. Children are not taught this rule explicitly, they absorb it relationally. When disagreement leads to tension, when refusal leads to withdrawal, when boundaries lead to coldness, the nervous system records the pattern. Later in life, the adult doesn't remember the lessons, but still feels the reaction. That's why guilt appears fast, before reasoning. Let's translate this into a familiar adult moment. You say no politely, calmly, respectfully. The other person pauses, just slightly, before responding. That pause alone is enough to trigger guilt in a conditioned system. Nothing was said, no anger appeared, no conflict occurred. But the micro shift in relational tone activates your internal alarm. Because your system is not only reading words, it is reading emotional signals. Tone changes, facial shifts, silence, hesitation. Emotionally sensitive people are highly accurate at detecting these micro signals, but often overinterpret their meaning. Signal detection becomes threat detection. Another layer underneath guilt boundary reactions is approval bonding. Some people learn to anchor emotional safety in being perceived positively, not occasionally, but consistently. Being seen as kind, helpful, easy, reliable, understanding, available. These traits become emotional identity anchors. Saying no threatens identity coherence. If your self-image is the supportive one, refusal feels like identity violation, not just behavioral choice. You don't only feel like you're disappointing them, you feel like you're betraying who you are supposed to be. Identity threat produces stronger guilt than behavior conflict. This is why some people say, "I know I'm allowed to say no, but it doesn't feel like me." It doesn't feel like you, because your relational identity formed around accommodation. Accommodation became belonging strategy. Now let's talk about emotional responsibility distortion. Many people with boundary guilt carry an exaggerated sense of responsibility for other people's emotional states. Not consciously, emotionally. They feel responsible not only for what they do, but for how others feel about what they do. This creates a hidden burden. I must not cause disappointment. But disappointment is not harm. Disappointment is a normal emotional response. Still, in a guilt-conditioned system, disappointment feels like injury. So the person avoids causing it, even at personal cost. This creates a pattern of emotional cost shifting. Instead of shared discomfort, you create self-absorbed discomfort. You take the full emotional weight into yourself. It feels generous, but it is imbalanced. Another mechanism at work is conflict association learning. If conflict in your early environment felt unsafe, loud, unpredictable, emotionally overwhelming, your system learned to avoid even mild forms of relational friction. Not because all conflict is bad, but because your early examples were dysregulating. Later, Even healthy disagreement triggers early conflict memory. Your system reacts to present tension with past intensity. So a simple boundary feels like a dangerous escalation, even when it is not. This produces fast compliance. Compliance feels like safety restoration. But safety restored through self-erasure is unstable safety. It must be repeated again and again. Now let's explore a subtle but powerful mechanism: emotional permission hierarchy. Some people unconsciously rank emotional permissions like this. Others' needs, high priority. My needs, negotiable. Not because they believe this intellectually, but because they learned it relationally. If your needs were minimized, delayed, or treated as burdensome early in life, your system learned to downgrade them automatically. So when your need conflicts with someone else's request, your need feels less legitimate, even to you. Legitimacy perception drives guilt intensity. If your need feels illegitimate, your no feels unjustified. Unjustified no produces guilt, even when objectively reasonable. Another important factor is empathy overload. Highly empathic people feel others' disappointment internally, almost as if it were their own emotion. This creates emotional blending. When someone is disappointed, you don't just observe it, you feel it. So you try to prevent it, not to control them, but to reduce internal discomfort. Empathy without boundary creates self-sacrifice reflex. Empathy with boundary creates sustainable care. The difference is emotional separation. Separation does not mean coldness. It means differentiation. I can care about your feeling without being responsible for it. This sentence is simple, but emotionally advanced. Many people were never modeled this distinction. Let's address a common misunderstanding here. People who struggle to say no are often told, "You just need more confidence." But confidence is not the root issue. Attachment safety is. If your system equates refusal with relational threat, confidence alone will not override it. You need emotional safety relearning, not personality strengthening. Because the guilt is not coming from weakness, it is coming from relational conditioning. And conditioning can be updated. Not instantly, but reliably. In the next part, we'll move into real-time interruption, how to recognize guilt activation while it's happening and how to respond without emotional self-betrayal, and without becoming cold or rigid. To really understand why saying no can feel so emotionally heavy, we need to look at how this pattern is formed, not in theory, but in lived emotional experience. No one is born feeling guilty for having limits. Limits are natural. Children say no easily. At first, they refuse food, refuse clothes, refuse instructions, refuse transitions. Early no is spontaneous and clean. Guilt around no is learned later, relationally. It forms when boundaries repeatedly collide with emotional consequences that feel unsafe, overwhelming, or connection threatening. Let's walk through how this happens, slowly and concretely. Imagine a child expressing a limit, "I don't want to." If the response they receive is emotionally regulated, calm, firm, connected, the child learns. Limits are allowed. Connection continues. But if the response is emotionally charged, irritation, withdrawal, coldness, shame, disappointment, the child learns a different lesson. Limits cost connection. Children do not analyze this, they adapt to it. Adaptation might look like faster compliance, softer resistance, self-silencing, over-explaining, appeasing tone, early agreement. Not because the child lacks will, but because connection matters more than preference. Connection is emotional oxygen in early life. Preference is negotiable, connection is not. So the nervous system chooses connection preservation. Years later, the adult doesn't remember the learning episodes, but still feels the reflex. Now consider another common formation path: emotional role assignment. Some children become the easy one, the helpful one, the mature one, the one who doesn't make trouble. This role is often praised, and praise is powerful conditioning. You're so understanding. You're so good. You're so easy to deal with. At first, this feels like appreciation. Over time, it becomes expectation. Expectation becomes identity. Identity becomes pressure. Now saying no doesn't just feel like refusal, it feels like stepping out of role. Role deviation triggers guilt, because belonging became tied to being emotionally convenient. Let's look at a different scenario: emotional parentification. This happens when a child becomes emotionally responsible for a caregiver's emotional state, not officially, but functionally. They learn to monitor mood, avoid triggering stress, provide comfort, reduce tension, stay agreeable. Their no feels dangerous, not because punishment will happen, but because emotional instability might. They become emotional stabilizers. Stabilizers don't refuse, they regulate others first. Later, in adult relationships, these individuals often feel automatic guilt when prioritizing themselves, not because they lack self-worth, but because their early role was emotional support, not emotional autonomy. Another formation pattern comes from inconsistent emotional response environments. If caregivers responded warmly sometimes and coldly other times, without predictability, the child learns emotional caution. They become relational strategists. They think, how do I say this safely? How do I ask without upsetting? How do I refuse without losing warmth? Safety becomes linked to emotional calibration. Direct no feels risky, soft yes feels safer. This produces what we can call boundary anxiety, not fear of refusal itself, but fear of relational consequence after refusal. Let's explore shame-linked boundary formation. Some people were not punished for saying no, they were shamed for it. Not loudly, subtly. You're being selfish. That's not nice. After everything I do for you. Good children don't act like that. Shame attaches moral weight to refusal. Now no is not just a preference, it is a character flaw. When moral weight attaches to boundary, guilt becomes automatic. Even decades later. Because shame memories are emotionally sticky, they embed deeply and activate quickly. There is also modeling influence. Children learn boundaries not only from how they are treated, but from what they observe. If they grow up watching caregivers who cannot say no, who overgive, over-accommodate, overextend, they internalize that pattern as relational normal. They don't think, this is unhealthy. They think, this is how caring people behave. Later, when they try to say no, it feels emotionally dissonant, not because it is wrong, but because it is unfamiliar. Familiar patterns feel right, even when costly. Unfamiliar patterns feel wrong, even when healthy. Now let's talk about attachment style shaping. People with anxious-leaning attachment conditioning often experience stronger guilt around boundaries because their system is more sensitive to signs of relational withdrawal. They read disappointment signals quickly. They feel tone shifts strongly. They detect micro-distance early. So they preemptively avoid actions that might create distance, including saying no. Avoidance of boundary becomes attachment preservation strategy. But attachment preservation through self-suppression creates long-term emotional exhaustion. Another origin factor is emotional reward for self-sacrifice. Some children are rewarded, emotionally, when they give up their needs. You're so generous. You always think of others. That's why everyone loves you. Generosity is beautiful, but when generosity is praised only when self-costly, the child learns. Self-denial equals love. Later, self-protection feels like betrayal of that identity. Guilt appears, not because they're wrong, but because they're acting outside rewarded pattern. Let's name something clearly here. Most guilt boundary patterns are not built on trauma, they are built on repetition. Small moments, repeated often. Tiny emotional lessons, reinforced quietly. No single dramatic event, just consistent emotional shaping. That's why people say, "I don't know why this is so hard. Nothing terrible happened." Patterns don't require catastrophe, they require consistency. Now let's connect this to adult relational dynamics. When someone with this pattern enters relationships, they often attract, or feel comfortable with, people who are more expressive in their needs than they are. More asking, more requesting, more leaning. Because saying yes feels easier than saying no, they tolerate imbalance longer. Tolerance becomes habit. Habit becomes relational shape. Then one day they feel overwhelmed and confused because they don't remember agreeing to this emotional load. But they did, through many small yeses under guilt pressure. Understanding formation is not about blaming the past, it is about freeing the present. Because once you see, this is learned, not inherent. You stop fighting yourself and start retraining your responses. In the next part, we move into interruption, not by becoming harsh or rigid, but by building emotional permission to set limits without self-punishment. Now we move from understanding to interruption, not suppression, not becoming cold, not turning rigid. Interruption. Because the goal is not to stop caring, it is to stop self-overriding. Most people try to fix this pattern at the level of behavior alone. They tell themselves, "Next time I'll just say no." But when the moment arrives, the emotional wave rises, and the old yes comes out again. Why? Because the pattern is not behavioral first, it is physiological first. Guilt activation is a body state before it is a thought. So interruption must start, where activation starts, inside the body. Let's slow down the moment someone asks something of you. Before the answer, there is a signal. A micro pause inside. A slight tightening. A pressure feeling. A subtle emotional drop. That is your boundary signal. Many people miss it, not because it's weak, but because they learn to step over it quickly. So the first interruption skill is this. Detect the signal before the sentence. Not after you say yes. Before you answer. You don't look for the right response. You look for the internal reaction. When you detect that inner tightening, you say silently, "Pause." Not out loud, internally. That pause, even to seconds, breaks the reflex chain. Reflex needs speed. Awareness creates delay. Delay creates choice. Now here's a simple but powerful tool most people underestimate. Neutral delay language. People with guilt boundary patterns often think responses must be immediate, but healthy boundaries often use time. Instead of yes or no, you say, "Let me check and get back to you. I need to think about that. Let me look at my schedule. I'm not sure yet." This is not avoidance, it is regulation time. Time allows your nervous system to settle before you decide. Settled decisions are clearer decisions. Another interruption layer is guilt labeling in real time. When guilt rises, instead of obeying it, you name it. This is guilt activation, not moral truth. That sentence changes your internal authority structure. Without labeling, guilt feels like command. With labeling, guilt becomes signal. Signals inform, they don't control. Many people obey guilt because they interpret it as ethical guidance, but emotional guilt and ethical wrongdoing are not the same thing. You can feel guilty and still be right. You can feel guilty and still be fair. You can feel guilty and still be kind. Emotion is not always evidence. Now let's talk about the difference between discomfort and danger, because your system often confuses them. When you say no and someone feels disappointed, your body may react as if something unsafe happened. But disappointment is not danger. Discomfort is not damage. Tension is not collapse. Learning to tolerate mild relational discomfort is one of the strongest boundary skills that exists. Not create discomfort, tolerate it. That means letting someone be slightly disappointed without rushing to repair it. Repair reflex is strong in guilt-conditioned people. They soften the no, add apologies, add extra giving, add compensation. Pattern interruption means allowing the no to stand without emotional over-repair. Not harshly, calmly. Another key tool is boundary phrasing that preserves connection tone while keeping limit clarity. Many people swing between two extremes. Over soft yes. Over hard no. We want something different. Warm no. Examples. I care, and I can't commit to that. I want to be honest, I don't have the capacity. I'd rather say no than say yes and show up half present. That matters, and I'm not able to do it. Warm tone plus clear limit. Tone protects connection. Clarity protects you. Let's address emotional imagination, because this fuels guilt escalation. When you consider saying no, your mind often predicts exaggerated consequences. They'll think I don't care. They'll pull away. They'll judge me. They won't ask again. I'll lose the relationship. These are emotional forecasts, not facts. Interruption requires probability correction. Ask. What is likely, not what is feared? Most healthy relationships tolerate respectful no. The ones that don't reveal something important. Boundaries don't destroy healthy bonds. They reveal unhealthy ones. Another interruption practice is micro-no training. People try to fix this pattern with big boundaries, but skills grow through small reps. Small nos build tolerance. No to. Small favors. Minor timing shifts. Tiny preferences. Low stakes requests. Each successful small no teaches your nervous system. Connection survived. Survival reduces guilt intensity next time. Boundary confidence is built, not declared. Let's talk about body regulation during boundary moments. When guilt rises, your nervous system enters mild threat mode. Breath shortens, muscles tighten, voice softens or rushes. So regulate first, answer second. Slow your exhale. Relax your shoulders. Lower your speaking speed. Regulated body, regulated boundary. Dysregulated body, overridden boundary. Another powerful interruption tool is self-permission language. Say internally, my need is real. My limit is allowed. Disappointing someone is not harming them. Respect includes myself. Permission counters guilt conditioning. Without permission, awareness collapses under pressure. With permission, awareness holds. Let's normalize something clearly. At first, saying no will still feel guilty, even when done well. That does not mean you failed. It means your nervous system is recalibrating. Emotional recalibration always feels strange before it feels natural. Familiar self-override feels comfortable, but costly. New self-respect feels uncomfortable, but stabilizing. Expect emotional lag between behavior and feeling. Behavior can change before guilt fades. That's progress, not hypocrisy. Another key interruption principle: do not over-explain your no. Over-explaining is guilt repair behavior. Long justifications are emotional cushioning. Clear boundaries don't require emotional essays. Short, kind, clear is enough. Over-explaining invites negotiation. Clarity invites acceptance. Now let's address fear of being seen differently. Many people with this pattern worry. If I start saying no, people won't see me the same way. That is sometimes true. But the deeper question is, will they see you more accurately? Accurate relationships are more stable than idealized ones. Being liked for self-abandonment is fragile approval. Being respected with boundaries is durable connection. Pattern interruption is not personality change, it is alignment change. You remain kind. You remain caring. You remain empathic. But you stop disappearing inside your yes. In the final part, we'll integrate this, not as technique, but as emotional permission to hold both care and limits without self-betrayal. Let's bring this together slowly and kindly. If saying no makes you feel guilty, it does not mean you are weak, selfish, or emotionally immature. It usually means you learned, somewhere along the way, that protecting connection required self-adjustment. Your system learned to bend before it learned to balance. And bending helped you belong. That matters. That deserves respect, not criticism. Many people try to fix this pattern by attacking themselves. They say things like, I need to stop being like this. I'm too soft. I'm too available. I'm the problem. But self-attack never produces healthy boundaries. It only produces emotional hardening, and hardening is not the same as strength. Real boundary strength is warm and steady, not sharp and defensive. You are not trying to become less caring. You are learning to include yourself in your circle of care. That is not selfishness. That is emotional inclusion. Let's name something clearly that many people need to hear. A respectful no is not rejection. Calm no is not cruelty. A grounded no is not betrayal. It is information. Healthy relationships can metabolize information. Unhealthy dynamics depend on self-erasure. If a relationship can only function when you override yourself, it is not stable, it is conditional. And conditional connection always produces anxiety, even when it looks peaceful on the surface. You are allowed to choose honest limits over quiet resentment. Because resentment is what grows when yes replaces truth too often. Resentment is not proof that you are unkind. It is proof that your boundaries are unheard, often by yourself first. Another important integration point is this. Guilt is not always a stop signal. Sometimes guilt is a growth signal. It appears not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are doing something new. Your nervous system is adjusting to a different relational posture. New posture feels emotionally strange before it feels emotionally right. Think about physical posture. If you've been standing incorrectly for years, correct alignment feels uncomfortable at first. Not because it is bad, but because it is unfamiliar. Emotional posture works the same way. Boundary alignment can feel uncomfortable before it feels natural. Do not use early discomfort as evidence of error. Use clarity as your guide, not emotional habit. Let's also release another heavy belief many people carry. You must be available to be loved. Availability is beautiful when it is chosen. Availability is harmful when it is automatic. Chosen availability feels generous. Automatic availability feels compulsory. Love grows in choice, not compulsion. You are allowed to be emotionally generous and emotionally selective. Those are not opposites. Another integration truth. Disappointing someone is not the same as harming them. Disappointment is a normal emotional experience. Everyone survives it, including people you care about. When you try to prevent all disappointment, you take responsibility for emotional experiences that are not yours to manage. You become emotional shock absorber for everyone, and absorbers wear out. Shared emotional reality is healthier than protected emotional illusion. People knowing your limits builds trust, even if it creates small moments of discomfort. Trust is built from truth, not constant agreement. Let's talk about identity, because boundaries reshape identity gently over time. When you begin to say no with awareness, you may feel like you are becoming a different person. In a way, you are, but not by losing kindness. You are becoming a person who includes themselves in their own empathy. That is expansion, not reduction. You don't lose warmth. You lose self-abandonment. You don't lose connection. You lose over-compliance. You don't lose generosity. You lose compulsion. There is a quieter, steadier kind of kindness that emerges after guilt-driven yes begins to soften. It sounds like, I want to help, and I need rest. I care, and I am not available. I value this, and I can't commit. This is not mixed messaging. This is integrated messaging. Care plus limit is emotional adulthood. Let's normalize the pacing of change. You will not master this in 1 week, or one conversation, or one boundary. Pattern change happens through repetition, just like pattern formation did. Small no. Regulate. Survive the discomfort. See that connection holds. Repeat. Each repetition teaches your nervous system a new relational truth. Limits do not destroy belonging. That lesson, once learned emotionally, changes everything. And finally, something steady and grounding. You are not here to become harder. You are here to become clearer. Clearer about your capacity. Clearer about your needs. Clearer about your limits. Clearer about your yes. A true yes only exists where no is allowed. When no becomes emotionally permitted, yes becomes emotionally real. And real yes builds real connection, the kind that doesn't require you to disappear to survive.